Okay, so I asked people what the next video they wanted to see from me was, and a lot of people said they wanted to hear me talk about angels. So this is going to be kind of a brief overview video, and I will likely do videos on specific angels and their lore later. If you're interested in me trying to be super objective and like giving you the really dry history, I have a blog post about it that I will link in the description box below. I'm also going to go ahead and own that I regard the essay as being incomplete because someone was kind enough to bring to my attention that Persia and Zoroastrianism both have contributed to angel lore in a way that I did not reference in my essay. So I'm still learning, despite having done all of the work I've done so far, and I want to own that. So just to make it abundantly clear, because I think I've alluded to this so far, but I haven't really said it explicitly, I am not trying to be objective here. I am trying to give my experience, which is one example of a theory or a conceptualization of how you can interact with these spirits in a way that does not involve being a Neoplatonist or a Christian or a Jewish person or a Muslim. Like you can be an animist and a polytheist and still have a relationship with these entities, right? And do it while still respecting the history and the tradition. My basic thesis is this. Angels can be conceptualized as animistic spirits. It is functional to think of them in 5 overlapping flights: personal guardians, virtues, winds, solar system, and far stars. So when I say animistic spirits here, the way most Americans and a lot of English speakers will be able to think of this is as a personification, right? That an animistic spirit is a personification of something that is not human so that we can interact with it using magical tools in a way that like is functional, right? I don't think science yet understands exactly why personifying things and relating to things in an animistic way works, but we know that it does work and that there's a lot of benefits, right? Before we get started, it's 2021, so I have to have this slide. Angel lore comes from a mishmash between Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and pre-Christian practices of various cultures. The 3 religions are distinct faiths. They have had and continue to have complicated and often violent relationships to each other. Currently, Islamophobia and anti-Semitism are on the rise in the US in like a really big and terrible way. And I don't know that this one slide and this one acknowledgement is really going to honor that, but I feel like it would be worse to do nothing. And I feel like it is better to try and make a mistake than to do nothing at all, because at least you learn from making a mistake. So, because we have to say this, Jewish people are not leading a secret group that runs the world from behind the scenes. The coordination that you are observing between people in positions of power is them acting out of self-interest because the tactics that maintain power are actually pretty have patterns, right? Like the International Monetary Fund and the US government and China and Russian government are making similar decisions on similar principles because these are the principles of centralizing and holding on to power, right? Power over, as we would say in reclaiming. There is not a secret conspiracy group of Jewish people. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, I hate 2021 in some ways. Let's start with virtues. So virtues are the flight that I think are the least distinct and the most widespread between a lot of the other flights. For me, the biggest way that we can understand virtues, as well as one of their many influences, is a Roman practice called the cult of virtues that happened in the late pagan era of Rome, right? Basically, they would personify virtuous concepts and build statues and temples. And we still kind of see that happen today. Like if I remember when I lived in Providence, Rhode Island, I saw a bunch of statues in public places, and I was like reading what the statues are, and it turned out that a lot of the human figures in these statues represented virtues, right? This may also have a link to the Zoroastrian practices I mentioned earlier, but I am not sure. I don't know that one yet. So the way that we can tell is that a lot of angels are named for virtues. I'm going to go ahead and own that these are all Hebrew names because I don't know the names in Arabic or really any other language, because Christianity never really bothered to translate from the Hebrew. All of the angels that I have given a translation here, these translations are rough translations. I don't speak Hebrew. I don't have anyone that I can pay to translate from Hebrew in a way that is more, what's the word I'm looking for? Nuanced. So this is like a very loose translation that I have been basing off of. One of the things that I do in my personal practice is that, again, I want to think of Christianity as having once been inspired by Judaism, but no longer being Judaism. And so to me, when I think of like, what is the language that most defines the particular branch of Christianity that I inherit, Latin is the answer. So I have tried to move the names into Latin. This is also my way of kind of fighting back against people using Hebrew as a magical language and then having no respect for Jewish people. And if you really want to have a reference on that, I would say Alphonse Louis Constant in History of Magic does a pretty good job of demonstrating the principle that I am trying to kind of press against here. So that's the virtues. The solar system and the far stars can kind of be described at the same time because they're very similar concepts. It's space animism, right? Every star, every constellation, every planet, every nebula, every asteroid can be thought of as having an animistic spirit, can be personified and chatted with. My experience is that the farther away the spirit is, the less interested they are on things on Earth and the more big picture they are, right? We see this in astrology as well, where the planets that are closer to Earth or closer to the sun, like Venus and Mars, have a tendency to have more to do with our day-to-day lives, right? Venus is usually attributed powers like attraction, communication, relationships, and then Mars is usually attributed as having like a very movement energy, sometimes to a fault, often to a fault. But then when you get to things that are farther away, like Pluto, Uranus, Neptune, those are generational planets that are looking at kind of the big picture and have a lot more to do with like broad political patterns than with like the day-to-day goings on, right? And my experience with spirits in space is that kind of tends to be their deal, especially the couple of times I've tried to talk to a constellation. They were very much like I'll tell you what time of day it is and which direction you're headed, but that's all I can do for you because you're all the way over there. There are 7 angels that are of particular importance to humans and to the lore, right? Like I would actually say of all the angels, these are the ones I talk to the most often. And that's the angels of the classical 7 planets. For those of you who don't know what I mean, the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn are the 7 bright things that move in the sky relative to the other bright things in the sky. So they are the 7 sky things that people were the most concerned with up until we got telescopes and started studying space a little bit more carefully. They are called planets. Obviously, they're not all planets, right? The sun is a star, the moon is a moon, but I do refer to them as the classical 7 planets because they would have been called that. And it's a little less poetic to say, oh yes, the 7 sky things, right? Different grimoire lineages and different lore have different ideas about which angels go to which planet. Michael and Raphael, which are, I'm not going to translate Michael's name because I don't have the time, it's complicated. They get switched around a lot, and Uriel gets placed in different places and what have you. Sometimes people will ask a subset of the 7 archangels to come down to Earth and help create ritual space by becoming the corner guardians. I personally am not a fan of this technique because to me it feels like there is like a kingdom of heaven and a kingdom of earth, and the kingdom of heaven is trying to dominate the kingdom of earth because heaven's the good kingdom and earth is the bad kingdom. I don't like this dichotomy. I don't like this interaction. It doesn't make any sense to me. I have been casting circle in a very different way for most of my practice, for all of my time practicing formally, and it has worked just fine. So I'm not doing this. It's not that I don't, appreciate what the archangels can do now that I'm in a relationship with them. It's just I don't feel like that is a space in my life that I need them to occupy or that I want them to occupy. When you're working with the archangels, specifically, both historically and in my personal experience, they care a lot about timing, like what time it is, not human time, like sky time. There's 2 systems to figure out who is having office hours when, right? Like you can kind of think of them as 7 professors who all have to share the same office and only one of them can hold office hours at a time, so they have a schedule for who is where when. Option number 1 is the planetary hours, which is that each of them rules over one day of the week. The angel of the day rules the first hour of the day, and then there's a rotation after that. An hour in this case is not what we think of as an hour now, where there's 24 hours of the day. The way that you figure out what the hour is you take the time between the sunrise and the sunset and you divide that into 12 equal parts, and that's a planetary hour. This involves a lot of math that I don't want to do. So whenever I want to know what the planetary hour is, I usually go to the website that I have shown in the slide that'll also be in the comments. It is, I will say, especially with the advent of internet apps, probably the easier of the 2 systems to use. And I would say, so long as you pick a system and you're consistent with it, you are probably fine. The system that I prefer is an astrological thing called the ruler of the ascendant, right? So the ascendant is the zodiac sign that is rising at the particular hour on the eastern horizon. So for example, the sun right now is in Taurus, which means that every day when the sun rises, Taurus, right, is the zodiac sign the sun is in. So Taurus is rising. Taurus is ruled by Venus, Taurus is a Venus season, right? There's flowers everywhere. People want to go out and make new friends. It's kind of Venus-y time. So that means that every day at dawn while the sun is in Taurus, it's Venus's office hours, which is the angel of joy, right, in the system that I use. If you want to learn how to do the astrology to learn the ascendant, or you want to follow along with me as I study and help others study using astrology for timing ritual, I am part of an astrology school that's run by queers called Stars Dance Mystery School. We have a website. You can go there and learn about the school and how we teach and stuff like that. I will say that traditionally, if you want to be real old-fashioned about it, you are supposed to combine both of these timing systems. And when it's convenient to me, I do try to combine them. That being said, again, I much prefer going by the ascendant to figure out whose office hours it is, because it means that it's always someone's office hours. Because if you have to go by whenever the planetary hours and the ascendant rule match up, it means that there's actually a lot of time where there's like nobody's actually in the office. And also, it kind of feels like putting 2 gearboxes in the same car, or like trying to make a car that's both a manual and an automatic at the same time. Like, why would you have 2 different clocks, both of which are already really complicated and have a lot of moving parts and seem complete unto themselves, and then smash them together? And I can say, functionally, you don't have to have the 2 of them line up. I'm currently experimenting with what happens if you do things when they do line up versus when you don't, and I will report back as soon as I have more data. So Here's some basic correspondences. You'll notice that there are 2 boxes that are not filled in. That's because I haven't done ritual with those 2 angels, so I don't know what their incense that they want me to use for them is, right? The sun, the angel's name that I use is light. I usually translate that to lux in Latin, right? Moon, strength, rober, right? I know the archangel of the moon likes mugwort for a lot of reasons. I will say about mugwort, it is mildly psychoactive, so you should probably not use it if you are sensitive to stuff. I am I am dating partnered to someone who is an herbalist, so my experience with mugwort has been led by somebody who has herbalism training. Yeah, I will. You can feel free to pause this video and take a look at the basic correspondences and write them down. There's also many, many places where you can find correspondences. These are just the ones that I use that have been working for me. So let's move on to the winds. It's hard to talk about the winds because they're not very systemic, right? The Hellenic world had a concept of 4 winds, like Zephyr of the West Wind is a great example of a spirit that predates the angels and kind of fits. And especially if you go and read watch Religion for Breakfast on YouTube has a video about demons that mentions demons as being winds and angels as being winds. There are wind spirits. They switch teams. We don't know what team they're on. I'm telling you right now, it doesn't matter. The thing that I have interacted with them a lot about is getting kind of the weather report. They have been very kind to me about occasionally being like, hey, it's going to rain, or hey, it looks like it's going to rain, but it's not going to. I've also gotten messages from them around, hey, today's a good day to do XYZ thing that you were planning on doing and keep putting off, or hey, don't do that thing you were planning on doing today. It's a bad idea. Sometimes I will say again, spiritual discernment is really important when working with them because they change their minds a lot. So if you haven't seen Jim Two Snakes' thing on spiritual accounting and learning discernment, you should Google it. I might also leave it in the description box if I remember. We'll see. So I think this is the last section is personal guardians because the personal guardians are the hardest to describe. There's 2 lines of thought about a personal guardian angel. The first is this idea of literally just a guardian angel, right? You don't have to be a spiritual person in order to have one. All they need to work to help you out is your permission, right? So you just have to talk to them for a couple minutes a day and give them permission to act in your life, and they will do that. A basic water offering or a prayer or light a candle and just talk to them for a few minutes, it's not complicated. Most of what the guardian angel seems to do is keep an eye out for you, although and they also kind of challenge you to do what's good for yourself. But most of what the thing that they can also do is if you are just getting started in spirit work, attuning to your guardian angel and then asking them to be an intermediary to introduce you to other spirits can help you have less problems with talking to spirits that are pretending to be one thing and are another. That does happen, especially with newbie practitioners that are easy to scare. And quite frankly, considering how hilarious it is, it's hard not to understand and sympathize with spirits that do this. I mean, it happened to me right when I first started talking to spirits. I definitely had a couple of times where I'm pretty sure something pretended to be something scarier than it was because it knew that I would jump 3 feet out of my skin. And it was right, and it was hilarious. Anyway, the other branch of what we have is called the Holy Guardian Angel. For those of you following at home with dry references, the Book of Abramelin is kind of closer to what I'm talking about here. The idea is that the HGA is, if you have this notion of God being separate from reality, the HGA is your go-to between here and the one. We're not monotheists. We believe usually in an immanent God or in a creator that is still reachable. So you should think of the HGA as actually technically being part of yourself, that is the part of you that is closest to the divine essence or to creator, however you conceive of a creator deity, right? The HGA is usually thought of as being a little bit more difficult to get in touch with, requires work, requires time. But once you make that connection, the HGA will kind of tell you what your spiritual practice should look like, right? I think this is also a thing that gets talked about a lot in Thelema. For those of you who are familiar with that, I think Leonard Cohen has actually written a lot about not the HGA, but about this kind of like higher self, or I think he calls it the silent watcher, that is kind of like our route to a spiritual life. And I think the HGA might actually get its own full treatment at some point, because it's a delicate and complicated subject that also has a lot of beauty to it. So talking to angels has like one trick to it, right? Like there is one little tricky technical bit, and in reclaiming we call it calling center, and in Thelema it is often called the bornless rite. But here's the idea. In mysticism, the idea is that creator and creation are not separate, right? And that you, as part of creator and creation, also take part in divinity, right? Like you are just as divine as anything else in the universe. In order to talk to angels, you have to be willing to basically own that. You have to own that you are part and whole simultaneously of the fundamental paradox that is often called the first mover, or of like creation, right? The Big Bang, the star stuff, right? Star goddess, however you want to think about it. Chaos, Tiamat. Everyone's got a different spin on this one. I do not have patience, in my experience, with people who do not believe themselves worthy enough to talk to them. And it kind of makes sense, because their big picture, the gifts that they can give, can be pretty big and life-altering in a good way, usually. And, well, ultimately. And they're not going to pour water into a cup with a hole in it. If you don't value yourself, you may not value the gifts that you are given. You may not steward the good that has been done to you. And the way to show them that you understand who they are and who you are, and that what talking to them means, and that you're going to steward whatever gifts they give you well, is to do this, right? To take on the mantle of self-determination from a spiritual perspective, to step into being co-creator of the universe along with all other conscious life, and to claim your own divine spark. This does not come across well in words or pictures. I am not sorry, because that's just the nature of the beast. And I hope that you, in your own practice, will find a way to understand what this means, so that you can reach out to them in a way that works for you. So hopefully by this point I've made my thesis pretty clear, right? Angels can be conceptualized as animistic spirits or personifications. It's functional to think of them in 5 overlapping flights: personal guardians, virtues, winds, solar system, and far stars, right? That's the overview. I do want to thank rawpixel.com for my pictures. All of them are public domain images, which is why I didn't get to put any really cool pictures up of like angels with 5,000 limbs and a bunch of eyeballs. And I want to thank SlidesGo for giving me the slides so that my presentation didn't look like garbage. I would also like to thank the Around Grandfather Fire Discord and 3 Pagans and a Cat Discord for supporting me in my efforts and like encouraging me to actually sit down and make this video. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.